Welcome to another edition of Back to the Basics, where we're still discussing the Great Deception. This is Elisha, your friend, your brother, and companion in the gospel. It is again an honor and a privilege to be able to come to you with the words of Yahuwah, the words of Yahusha HaMashiach. As always, it is my prayer that all who listens to this podcast will be gaining greater wisdom, knowledge, and understanding. With that in mind, let us pray. Heavenly Father, in the name of Yahuwah, we come thanking you for yet another day. Thank you for your grace that is sufficient for all of our needs. We thank you for opening our eyes of our understanding that we may be enlightened. Teach us to stand fast in the liberty wherewith you have made us free, and be not entangled again with yokes of bondage. Teach us to be still and know that you are Yahuwah. Teach us to be bold as a lion, but yet as harmless as a dove, as you bring these revelations to us. As we believe it, receive it, and live it. This is my prayer. In our last lesson, we discussed the Nazarene betrayed, beaten, and begotten, part 5. But the subtopic, Apostle Shaul, leader of the Nazarenes and follower of Yahusha. Today we'll discuss part 6, Shaul, the Nazarene. We concluded the last lesson with regarding the false teachers. We said since the false teachers cannot properly teach them his letters, talking about Shaul's letters, they instead declare him a false teacher. We always kick that what we don't understand. So they are not exposed as very immature teachers at best, if not false teachers themselves who do not understand what they read. Any decision of Shaul, the apostle today, must come with the strong rebuke of those who would bear false witness against the most influential and anointed teacher of the Nazarenes. What these immature teachers are rebelling against is not Shaul's actual teachings, but the Pauline doctrine of the Christian church, not the assembly of the Nazarene. But they are going off a soundbite-driven doctrine that is born out of twisted, mistranslated texts. Let's look at Shaul, the Nazarene. The Pauline doctrine, in a nutshell, is a Greek-appropriate soundbite-driven, mistranslated, and intentional twisting of what Shaul actually wrote, called the replacement theology, that states the law has been abolished for grace. The Roman Church has replaced Israel. The New Testament has replaced the Old Testament. Rome replaced Jerusalem. The Catholic priesthood replaced the priesthood of Levi. Jesus H. Christ replaced the name Yahusha, the Messiah. Roman citizen Paul replaced the Hebrew apostle Shaul, Paul the Nazarene. The Trinity replaced Yahuwah. Baptism replaced mikvah. Salvation is placed solely on grace with no works of the law required. In fact, if you attempt to be obedient to the law, you may offend grace and you are damned. This is called replacement theory and is a bold-faced, mistranslated, soundbite lie. That's a good place to shout if you missed it. All of this under the replacement theology was attributed to the Apostle Shaul, who had been presented to us as a Roman citizen and former Yahudian or Jew, who rejected Judaism for Christianity. This false image of the Apostle Shaul is as destructive as the false image of Yahushua the Messiah, known today as Jesus, the Roman demigod. Yahushua and Apostle Shaul were two of the most influential Nazarene teachers in history. To create Christianity, these two Nazarenes had to be minimized, marginalized, and incorporated into the Greek Hellenized world. They had to cast some doubt over their names to discredit them. This Pauline doctrine is a lie and twists Shaul's writings to contradict himself. Not only himself, but Yahuwah, the law and the prophets, and the Messiah. Yahushua's own words. In fact, if you believe the Pauline doctrine, as it is taught in the pagan Christian church, you're left with just Paul as the source of your faith. Because no other writer throughout the entire scriptures ever support that doctrine, not even Shaul himself. If you believe in the Pauline doctrine, then Paul, the Roman citizen, stands alone in contrast to every other man in the scriptures that is mentioned from Adam to Enoch to Noah to Abraham to Yitzhak to Yaakov to all the prophets, judges, kings, all the way down to Yahushua, even all the Nazarenes of the early ecclesia for 300 years until the Council of Nicaea, who based their understanding on Shaul. All these men kept the Torah and worshiped the one and only Elohim, whose name is Yahuwah. Not one man in the entire Bible or early ecclesia kept Sunday, which is Dies Solis, the day of the invincible sun, straight out of Babylon. They didn't keep Easter, which is Ishtar Day, that Semiramis, the mother and wife of Nimrod, created, also out of Babylon. They didn't create or worship Christmas, which is a Roman pagan holiday that was originally called Christ's Mass. Or they never worshiped the Trinity. No one, not one man in that long line of sons of Yahuwah ever believed anything close to the Pauline doctrine or incarnation. Not even Shaul himself, as we're about to find out. Now I'm going to prove that Shaul never believed in anything other than the Torah, which he kept and taught, and that he was obedient to the Sabbaths and holy days. He taught the Messiah in light of the prophets and Torah, and was uniquely qualified to teach how Yahushua fulfilled the law, because Yahushua transposed the law from written in stone to written on our hearts. Now that's a good place to shout. Yes, transposition is at the heart of Shaul's writings, just like it was the message of Yahushua's ministry. I explained the concept of transposition and progressive revelation in the series The Kingdom. Now I advise you to go back and review it for reference if you haven't. Two, for clarity. Shaul was just like any other man of Yahuwah from Genesis to Revelation. In fact, Shaul was instrumental in the growth of the early assembly, or rather the Nazarene ecclesia. They taught these early assemblies to keep the Torah, the Sabbaths, and holy days for the first 300 years until AD, when Constantine outlawed the things holy to Yahuwah and forced sun worship on all humanity. Shaul did it, no one else. It was Emperor Constantine and the Greeks who twisted Shaul's writings into a lie. His writings were further twisted by famous reformers who are close to being worshipped in Christian Protestant circles. In the modern English Bibles, which is full of errors, Shaul's writings bear no resemblance to his teaching. Only in modern times is Yahuwah moving to restore his word and give us eyes to see beyond the abomination known as the English Bible, with all of its intentional mistranslations, additions, and subtractions to support Babylonian sun worship. After all, that is why we to this day worship on Sunday in churches throughout the world. Sunday, Soli Victus, Die Solis, the day of the invincible sun, straight out of Babylon. I know that it is a very shocking statement to make. And guess what? That applies to the King James translation too. Our Bibles are not inerrant. In fact, the English translation has at least, at the last count, over 300,000 errors resulting from copying and recopying copies of pagan scribes who inserted their own belief system into the text. That's a good place to shout, y'all, because he's opening our eyes. We can see now. It is only now in recent modern times with new discoveries such as the Dead Sea Scrolls and other modern techniques and archaeological discoveries that we can identify these errors. Only now can we overcome them to restore the word of Yahuwah and recreate to the best of our abilities what the original writings in Hebrew said before Constantine burned them at the Council of Nicaea. All of the translations attempted a word for word translation, leaving much to be understood, as context and the Hebraic mindset is ignored in that translation technique. We are still in the position of not understanding the language, cultural matrix the scriptures were written in, putting us in dire need of anointed teachers that is gifted by Yahuwah. Oh, you ought to be shouting right now. Thank Yahuwah for anointed teachers. Yahuwah is raising up a number among us and giving them the burning desire and wisdom to go back to the needed research to restore the language matrix of the first century and properly teach the New Testament Yahushiach covenant in light of the scriptures in context. Because if it's out of context, it is no more the word of Yahuwah. It's just some man's ideology. These are men and women with the gift of teaching who can put the word back in context of the Hebraic mindset. I want to point out a quote from the book Ancient Near Eastern Thought and the Old Testament, introducing the conceptual word of the Hebrew Bible. It states a very real truth. It says, since communication requires a common ground of understanding, both the speaker and the audience must do what they can to enter their common ground. For the speaker, that often requires accommodating the audience. One uses words representing ideas that the audience will understand, thus, by definition, accommodating the target audience. When that common core of understanding exists between the speaker and the audience, the author will not bother to explain himself to the understanding audience. But if a later date, at a later date, An uninformed person that is not associated with the common core of understanding reads the book and they are not native to the language cultural matrix, then much work must be done by the reader to seek out additional information and explanation. If someone outside the language cultural matrix wants to take advantage of the information, they must adapt to the unfamiliar language cultural matrix within which the book is written. This is the case today with the Holy Scriptures, both when attempting to understand the Torah and prophets, but also when attempting to understand the Gospels and writings of the Yahushua covenant. To truly understand the writings we call scriptures, we must transcend our modern language cultural matrix and put ourselves in the proper mindset of the Hebrew language cultural matrix that existed thousands of years ago. And unfortunately, most people do not have the time to do so. So this job falls on the shoulders of those that are anointed by Yahuwah to do it for them. Teachers, anointed teachers. Yes, we need teachers. The Ruach HaKodesh, the Spirit, is not all we need. That too is a soundbite lie. Now let's clear up one of the myths. All I need is the Ruach or the Spirit. I don't need no stinking teacher. I follow no man. So says the one in complete deception. That is the declaration of a fool. You need more than the Holy Spirit. You need more than the Ruach HaKodesh. You need a teacher. Let's look at Michelle 1 and 5. A wise man will hear and keep his mouth shut and increase in learning, and a man of understanding will acquire wise counsel. If I've heard that once, I had to listen to that rebellion against his anointed teachers a million times. If you're listening to this podcast, that obviously does not apply to you because I'm a teacher and you're hearing or heeding my wise counsel. Most of the masters today have a totally lost concept with the Yahushua covenant and the concept of discipleship. Are we out there as members not making disciples, which is why the masses are so misled. The body functions as a whole, and teachers are vital to its survival. Let me go back. Anointed teachers are vital to its survival. Alive from the pit of hell is all I need is the Ruach HaKodesh. I need nothing else, and I do not follow any man. Teaching is a spiritual gift that is given to a very select few. If you read Corinthian Rishon, chapter 12, the body functions as all individual parts submit to the others. The Ruach HaKodesh is a guide as you seek out a mentor to lead you into knowledge and understanding. Then study and apply yourself. As Paul said, or Shaul says, study to show thyself approved unto Yahuwah, a workman that needs not to be ashamed, but rightly dividing the words of truth. Don't wait for somebody to give it to you. Hunger and thirst after the righteousness of Yahuwah. Ask him to give you clarity. Apply yourself. This lie that all I need is the Ruach is easily proven to be a lie. Almost everyone is lost in total deception by the false ruach, incarnation. Exactly as we was warned, there are many interpretations as there are people. So how is it that the Ruach, Hakodesh, the Spirit of Yahuwah, has created such confusion? It's simple, because it is not true that all I need is the Ruach. And teachers are not required. The problem is that there are too many self-appointed teachers and very few truly anointed ones. We had better wise up as a body. The Ruach HaKodesh is a guide and not a personal tutor. Mentors are being raised up by Yahuwah, and he speaks to them and then guides our search for the truth. If we hunger and thirst for that truth. Daniel 11:33-35 said, those few who are wise will instruct many, though for a time they will fall by the sword or be burned or captured or plundered. When they fall, they will receive a little help, and many self-appointed teachers who are not secure, so are sincere, will join them. 35. Some of the wise will stumble, and so that they may be refined, purified, and made spotless until the time of the end. If you show me someone who never fell, I'll show you one that never got up. The point is not that you fell, but get up. So some of the wise will stumble, so that they may be refined, so they'll be purified and made spotless until the time of the end. For it will come at the appointed time. I failed countless times, but Yahuwah never gave up on me. He knew that I was being refined. I was being purified and made spotless until the end. So he would be able enough, and that he knew that I was confident enough for him to trust his word with. So go it alone if you want. You're only fooling yourself. And in the process, misleading everyone around you because you're out of covenant with Yahusha and have no understanding and are not submitted properly to the body. Very few are truly anointed to teach very few. And that comes with great responsibility. Each of us should have mentors, counselors, to whom we look up to for instruction. Look at Michele 15-22. Plans fail for lack of counsel, but with many advisors, they succeed. Michelle 11-14 says, for lack of guidance, a nation falls, but victory is won through many advisors. Timothy Ishini 2:2 says, the things which you have heard from me in the presence of many witnesses, entrust these to faithful men who will be able to teach others also. We need each other. Stop trying to go it alone. I always tell my friends that if I have it, you have it. Don't try to reinvent the wheel. Mishael 27:17 said, iron sharpen iron, so one man sharpens another. Mishael Proverbs 9:9 said, give instructions to a wise man, and he'll be still wiser. Teach a righteous man, and he will increase in learning. Philippians 4:19 said, the things you have learned and received and heard and seen in me, practice these things, and the Yahuwah of peace will be with you. Ivrium 13:7 says, remember those who led you, who spoke the words of Yahuwah in you, and considering the result of their conduct, imitate their faith. Don't imitate them, but imitate their faith. Because Yahuwah don't give us what he gave others. He gives us what we can handle. Now let's look at the soundbite implied lie. You're counting. 14:26 says, but the helper, the Ruach HaKodesh, the Holy Spirit, whom the Father will send in my name, he will teach you all things and bring to your remembrance all that I said to you. Notice the Ruach HaKodesh brings to remembrance all that Yahusha has said. Yahusha was speaking as a teacher. In other words, you need the Ruach plus the teachers, not just the Ruach HaKodesh. If the anointed teachers did not exist, there will be nothing for the Ruach HaKodesh to bring to your remembrance. Does that make sense? If it does, you ought to be shouting right now. We're reading words that was penned by men who lived 2,000 to 5,000 years ago in a language cultural matrix that is outside our knowledge and understanding. In other words, we need anointed teachers that were sent by Yahuwah to bridge this language cultural gap and who would understand the mystery language and follow the ancient Enochian path. In Shaul's case, as a teacher, his audience over 2,000 years ago was a familiar audience, and they existed on common ground. Shaul simply did not need to explain himself to an audience that was already familiar with the language and cultural matrix. Even then, Shaul and Yahusha vetted their speech in what is called the mystery language. Ooh. So the Ruach HaKodesh, Spirit of Yahuwah, would be required to unlock their understanding. Shaul had no idea that a simple private letter he wrote would someday be elevated to the level of inspired words of Yahuwah in error, because Shaul was a teacher, not a prophet, and then canonized into something called the Bible and studied by cultures around the world. Had he been privy to this future knowledge, I'm quite sure his letters would have become books, hundreds of pages long, to properly explain himself in the language and cultural matrix that he lived in. He would have gone to great lengths to explain complex ideas and topics, knowing this future audience would be from another language cultural matrix altogether. But he had no way of knowing that. Shaul did not know this, and his letters are very short. And a great deal of knowledge and information was already shared between Shaul and the person or the assembly to whom he was writing. So Shaul did not see the need to elaborate on many ideas. They were assumed by his audience. This is where the opportunity to twist the scriptures presented itself to those who are not anointed. To think we can just pick up our English Bible and read a small letter that Shaul wrote that had been transliterated through 2 or maybe 3 languages across many cultures over the past 2,000 years, and the Ruach HaKodesh is going to fill in the blanks, is foolish on our part. We need anointed teachers. Good place to shout. We, as the ones who are listening to this podcast, must put in much effort to put ourselves into the Hebraic mindset over 2,000 years ago and be mindful of the language and cultural barriers. Even then, we must be anointed with the understanding of the mystery language by Yahuwah to be able to teach it. This is what anointed teachers bring to the table. Instead, we have been conditioned to believe that Yahusha and Shaul and other writers in the Yahushua covenant communicated and wrote in Latin. You see, Latin was a transitional language to the Yahudims of the Second Temple period. It was not their native language. So there's zero chance that the early believers that was made up of exclusively Hebrew Nazarenes communicated in anything other than their native Hebrew tongue, not Latin. We must admit to ourselves the effects of Rome winning the Roman Yahudish or Jewish wars and what that effect had, not only in history, but in the Bibles that we have in our hands today. We need to study the history of the early assembly, how Christianity was created, and admit and research that Constantine burned all the original Hebrew texts after the Council of Nicaea to hide what was done to humanity at that council. Humanity was given Constantine's existing religion called the cult of Sol Invictus, straight out of Babylon. And the scriptures were altered to support that false religion. That is why the earliest version of the New Testament writers we have today are no earlier than 300 years after the Messiah's death and was written in Latin. The Council of Nicaea was 300 AD. These latter Latin versions were translated from Hebrew origins but were altered by the pagan Latin scribes to support pagan Greek Hellenism and sun worship. I explained all of this in great detail in the series Christianity and the Great Deception. Just go back and do some review. So, this is our challenge today in this modern age. Some 2,000 years removed from the first advent of the Messiah. We must restore back to these earliest writings their Hebrew framework and put ourselves, as much as we can, into the proper language cultural matrix in which the books of the Yahushua covenant was written. We must literally go back to the drawing board and cast aside the last 2,000 years of Roman bias interpretation and effects of Hellenism. This is a good place to stop. Join me for our next lesson, the Nazarene, betrayed, beaten, and begotten, part 7, where we discuss the subtopic, Shaul, 10 Rules of Study. If you're listening to this podcast, just know that we are in the hour of the Great Awakening. where Yahuwah is gathering back to himself the lost sheep of the house of Israel. Someone asked a question the other day, how do you know if I'm one of the lost sheep of the house of Israel? He said, I know that I love Yahuwah and the Torah and keep the Sabbath. I told him that is the very indication that you are one of the lost sheep of the house of Israel. Because Yahuwah has written his laws on your heart. And when you hear the message of the law, the Ruach HaKodesh, or Spirit of Yahuwah, quickens that truth that is in his law, that is written in your heart, that causes you to respond to the message of the law. After all, that is how Shaul identified the lost sheep of the house of Israel, who were living among the Gentiles in his day. Those lost sheep of the house of Israel who were coming out of Syrian and Babylonian captivity, who had forgotten their identity until Shaul approached them, teaching the law. And the Ruach HaKodesh revealed the law that was written in their heart. Even though they were in captivity, forgotten who they were, the Ruach HaKodesh breathed on them and revived that law that was in their heart. And they remembered their identity. Remember, Yahushua was only sent to the lost sheep of the house of Israel, of whom Yahuwah has scattered into all nations, Gentile nations, not the whole world. And let's be specific, the only nationality of people that have been scattered to every nation for 400 years, according to Deuteronomy 28 chapter, is what is called today black people. Those who have been enslaved for over 400 years and oppressed even to this day. But now remember, there's another group of people that Yahuwah will identify and also receive an inheritance from the lost sheep of the house of Israel when they enter into the kingdom of Yahuwah. Or the Gentiles, the good stranger. This is where Yahuwah is going to flip the script, where the oppressor becomes the oppressed, and the oppressed become the oppressor. The good stranger that has joined themselves with Israel by humbling themselves and accepting the laws and ordinances of Yahuwah in their hearts. He's going to accept them as well. So it is my prayer that this truth will reach all who will believe it, receive it, and live it. But to do that, you must be bold as a lion, but yet harmless as a dove. Again, I want to thank all of you who have been following this podcast from day one. I know without a shadow of a doubt that your life has been changed forever, just like countless others have, including my own. If you're listening to this podcast for the very first time, I want you to know that it's not by happenstance that you found this podcast, but rather it was by divine appointment. It is an answer to the prayers that you've been praying, questions that you've had throughout the years, and Yahuwah has been getting your attention. Now he sent you to this podcast because of your hunger and thirst after the righteousness of Yahuwah. And if that is you, don't forget to hit that subscribe button so that you can get all the lessons that you missed. And when you subscribe, I want you to scroll all the way down to the very first lesson. And I want you to listen to each lesson in sequence. Don't skip around. It might be attempted to do that, but don't skip around. Listen to each one in sequence so that you can get the full revelation that Yahuwah intends for you to get. Don't forget to leave your comments. Your comments are very important to me. Many of you have blessed me with your comments, and I thank you for sharing. Again, don't forget to share this podcast with all your family and friends. Everyone needs to know the truth. If you'd like to follow along with me in the series, I recommend you get this book, The Nazarene, Betrayed, Beaten, and Begotten by Rav Shaul. This is Elisha, your friend, your brother, and companion in the gospel. Until next time, be blessed.